fairly lot to cover. Um, so basically, we know we've got a very long history of industrial activity in Gloucestershire. From the archival point of view, we've got sort of records from the 1400s onwards, although it's very, very narrow there. So we're going to look at all kinds of this heritage. Um, it's going to include engineering, extractive industries, energy generation, shipbuilding, milling. We are not going to cover agriculture, aviation, or transport, so road, rail, councils. These have either been covered previously or will be covered quite soon. And if we did include these, then we'd be here till next Tuesday. So we'll get straight on to it. So we'll first look at agriculture engineers. So by Victorian times, there were many agricultural engineering firms around the county. Most originated as blacksmiths, and these people would repair agricultural tools and also make improvements to them and occasionally make new ones completely. Like many small engineering firms, they would undertake virtually any type of work, from building, repairing carts and farm vehicles, making pumps and steam engines, repairing early cars, and making farm equipment. And in addition to this, some actually became implement dealers and agents. And this is a lovely picture of the Felix of the Upthrop Ironworks of Cam, and it shows Felix Lacey with his wife outside their premises. And this cottage is still there. You still go and see it today. Um, Agricultural machinery is also the realm of numerous inventors nationally, but local men, notably Edwin Budding of Eastington and the Yorkshireman Richard Clyburn, and these would both work for several firms in the Stroud area during their careers. This is typical of their work. This is a Clyburn and Budding chaff cutter, and a chaff cutter was a little mechanical device that was used for cutting up straw or hay into smaller pieces, so it could be mixed up with other forage and fed to horses and cattle. Look on most farms, they're still around today, usually rusting in the corner of a barn somewhere. This one is slightly different. This is the Ewley cultivator. It's designed by Clyburn and made by the Earl of Douce's Ewley Ironworks. It was a really advanced machine for its day. It produced even rows, and you could regulate the depths of these rows by adjusting a pointer on a dial. And believe it or not, it even recorded the results as a paper printout. So a fascinating machine. Sadly, I don't think there are any left around. What a shame. It would be great if we could find one. Workman& Sons, so these were based in Slimbridge. They began in 1861 as a general engineering firm, but being Slimbridge very in a rural area, a lot of their business came from the local agriculture and farming sector. But they also undertook metal casting for companies, built and supplied wood sawing machinery to local firms, and for a time they sold Garrett traction engines, and as well as servicing, repairing Sentinel steam lorries. Most famously, they developed a range of mechanical mills and presses for cider making, and this revolutionized apple juice extraction, and it made the company very famous, and their products were sold all over the place: Jersey, Ireland, even the USA, and lots of them can still be seen today. Funny enough, when I was looking for this, the most used ones are in the USA, and they get cropped up there more than over here, which I thought was very interesting. Kell and Co were another very important company. They're a family-run iron foundry owned by Samuel Kell of Suffolk, but they moved to Ross and Wye in 1838. By 1856, they'd established a second foundry at Gloucester. They became a very famous manufacturer for seed drills, winnowing machines, ploughs, chaff cutters, potato sorters, and lots of other small implements. And there are plenty of them around today. You can still, usually these are stuck outside a pub or painted up like the one in the bottom corner here. So you can find them if you keep your eyes open. In 1855, the company joined the Helipebs Group, and because of its foundry machine shop activities, it quickly became a major subcontract supplier to firms such as Field and Platt, GAC, and Rank Xerox, to name but a few. So, some of these companies had a real long reach. Having said we're not going to look at aviation, I'm just going to have a look at this quick line here. So aviation was, and obviously still is, a major Gloucestershire industry, and it came to the county in the early 1900s. Essentially, it's sad to say, most of the early firms failed. Webb, Pete and Co is notably, but others took their place: Rotel, Doughty, Smiths, Martins, Gloucester Aircraft Company, Sperry's, Parnells. Now, as I mentioned, really, I started to include these in this talk, but I realised when I was up to about slide 60 and I hadn't left aviation, it was just too many. So we are going to have a future Secrets Revealed in Aviation. It's going to be November 2026, and there's going to be a dedicated Saturday event at the archives on the history of aviation in December 2026. So, a little bit wild today, but just whet your appetite for it. from sublime to ridiculous in many ways. So basketry, it was an enduring industry that's been practiced since prehistory. At the end of the process were the makers, and these are some lovely photographs that were taken in via the Archives Green Pledge project, and they show members of the Cale family who are basket makers in Quedgeley. And so from left to right, you see Fred Cale making a putcher for a fish weir, and his son Jack Cale with a chair and a basket making. So some of this work was really, really well done, and they're not too common today, but you can still find odd examples. So in addition to the basket makers, why is it industry? Well, there are also the men and women who manage, cut and dry the osiers, which is willow, the hazel, rushes and reeds. And you can have a look to see where these activities took place. And a lot of the OS maps, so reeds and osiers, are shown on OS maps. This is a couple of 1881 maps here, around by Stonebench and also by the Dinny by Minsterworth. And the top one has the reeds, which you can see these little sort of little triangular sort of stippled ones. And then the bottom, we've got the smaller trees. These are the osiers, and these were the trees that were cut and harvested for the actual processing for the industry itself. Moving on to bell founding, so it's been an industry in Gloucester for over 1,000 years, and the earliest bell cast in the city was in 890 in St Oswald's Priory. This has come through the sort of the church records, but we have some other material. So this is a deed release of 1303, and it names Christina the bell founder, who was the daughter of Hugh the bell founder. We know his business was in Lower Westgate Street in 1270, but by 1304 it was being run by his daughter. So this is a really nice instance of a woman business person running a really industrial concern. In 1346, there was a John the Belter of Gloucester who cast large bells for Ely Cathedral. And in 1500s, William Henshaw, who was 5 times mayor of Gloucester, had established a very famous bell foundry, which gave its name to the now lost Bell Walk. And this is sort of one of the tiles on Northgate Street, which you can see there. Obviously, the most famous bell founders in the county were the Ruddles. There's a family business, and between 1684 and 1835, they cast, it's been estimated, over 5,000 bells. This bell was cast by Abrian Ruddle, the first one in 1710, and it's for a church in Stone in Staffordshire. And it was rescued by Gloucester Civil Trust, and it's now in St Michael's Tower, Gloucester. So do go in and see it, and you can actually still sound it off. They have little hammers you can use, and they're beautiful sounds. The company say founded by Abrian Ruddle. He developed a unique method of tuning bells by turning them on a lathe rather than a traditional way of chipping away on the inside with a chisel. So it was quite a famous process, which is probably why it became so important and why it became so famous. He was described as the greatest bell founder of his age, but he also cast other things. And I found this lovely bronze mortar that he'd cast on an antique site for sale. So most of our records relating to Ruddles come from parish accounts, which showed expenditure on their bells. And this is a typical one. This is an itemised receipt from Abraham Ruddle for casting 6 new bells for the parish of Bybury in 1723. The bill came to £56.12, about just under £7,000 today. But as you can see, it's immense detail in this. And you're looking at the tenor bells, 4th bells, 3rd bells, 1st bells, and all. It's very, very interesting. It's a great little thing, and we do have lots of these. Lots of these church woods accounts have bells work in them. When Abrian died in 1735, the business continued in the family line, but by 1815, John Ruddle, who was Abraham's great-grandson, sadly, he was declared bankrupt, and the foundry was bought by Mears and Steinbank, and they owned the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London, and Ruddles formally closed in 1828, so at the end of bell making in Gloucester. Quick look at breweries. So commercial brewing really began in monasteries where beer was brewed for the monks and as payments for lay staff. And interestingly, this sort of shifted making and drinking of beer to men, as previously it had been seen as women's work and was generally undertaken in private houses. but the monasteries needed more sort of more beer to brew, so they had bigger premises and bigger breweries. Post-Reformation, common brewers began to appear as they were known, and by the 1700s, you got small industrial scale breweries emerged, especially in London, where they could capitalise on mass markets. And it's interesting that the wheel has sort of gone full circle, because one of the things with brewers is they expanded rapidly, took over other ones, and then contracted. And now we have lots of niche breweries. So large breweries existed in Cheltenham, Stroud, Gloucester, and Mishaldene, to name but a few from the 1850s. And there's a very good website run by the Brewery History Society, and the website is there, and it's listed over 200 brewers in this county, both large and small scale. So it was an amazing, busy business. They were frequently, however, breweries frequently taken over or merged by other brewers, and this gradually led to just a few super breweries appearing. So, a typical of this is the evolution of the Cheltenham Original Brewery, which was founded by J. Ag Gardner in the High Street, Cheltenham, in 1760. By 1946, it acquired the Nailsworth Brewery, Wickwar Brewery, Wintles Brewery, Grafton Brewery, Stowe Brewery, Taylor's Brewery, City Brewery, Sun Brewery, Bournestream Brewery, Arnold Perrott and Co., and Godson Sons Limited. So at various dates, I didn't put the dates in, it's too complicated. So you can see how these breweries grew and grew. In 1946, it changed its name to Cheltenham and Hereford Breweries, and then it was taken over by Cheltenham Brewery Holdings Limited, which is a subsidiary of it, and then they acquired even bigger Stroud Brewery in 1958. 1961, name changed to West Country Breweries Limited, and then to West Country Brewery Holdings Limited. Before, in 1963, it was acquired by Whitbreads. And then it ceased brewing in 2001. And if you sort of lived anywhere near Cheltenham, you'd always recognise when they were brewing in the actual brewery day. You could smell the yeast and the hops going around. But you can see how these breweries sort of expanded and contracted. And on that note, it's a lovely painting here, a promotional one of Cheltenham Original Brewery Company's new brewery, which was rebuilt after the old premises burnt down in the fire. And of course, fire was an ever-present risk in the breweries, because they were usually heating up the mash that's sort of used to make the beer. So there are lots of fires around. So it was quite a dangerous place to work. Arnold Perrott and Co. Wickwar, they began brewing in 1760, and by 1924 they'd merged with the Cheltenham Original Brewery and they ceased brewing. But they did actually remain a separate entity for sales, and they kept a bonded warehouse on Key Street in Gloucester until the 1960s. Some may recall this as the Casey's nightclub, which is still there today, and many a few beers have been drunk in there, I can tell you. To wet your whistle, brewing is going to be the subject of next September's Secrets Revealed, and also next October's Saturday event. So there's going to be a bit more insight to this. I can't promise we'll have beer to taste, but you never know. Quick look at brickmaking. It took place in the Vales of Bourton, Morton, Evesham, and Gloucester. As seen here, this is typified by the Brockworth Brickworks and the Walham Brickworks. These are on Byrne Island there, and also the Stonehouse Brick and Tile Works. The upper bunch contained Lias Group clays, whereas the South Gloucestershire and Forest coalfields hold Carboniferous clays, and both were used for brickmaking. The 1910 edition of Kelly's Directory listed 25 brickmaking companies, but we know there are many more smaller concerns. There is at least 15 smaller ones around Stroud, some of which only lasted for a few years, and that bit of information came from the Gloucester Society for Industrial Archaeology. Have a look on their website, put in brickmaking, and there's a real nice article on brickmaking there. Moving on to extractive industries, we'll start off with mining. So coal mining has been undertaken in Gloucestershire and South Gloucestershire since the medieval period. In the forest, the Dean Forest Mines Act of 1838 formed the basis of free mining law, with miners registering to work a gale which specified the place in the mineral they could extract. This act also confirmed the free miners' exclusive rights to the minerals of the forest, but also allowed them to sell their gales to non-free miners. So this allowed commercial, larger mines to open. Most forest mines, though, were small, notoriously cramped drift mines, as they were known, worked by just one or two men, but they had wonderful names: Strip and At It, the Gentleman Colliers, and I love Rainproof. One of the issues with forest mines, we'll see next slide, was water, to be honest, but the lovely pictures here of forest miners. And of course, there is one mine that's still open. You can visit it, Hopewell Colliery. If you've not been there, thoroughly recommend you go. It's very interesting. So, as well as the drift mines, over 15 deep mines, as they're known, were opened. And this is Canop Colliery in 1932, which is now the Francis Dean Cycle Centre. It was Dean's largest and a very huge mine it was. Opened in 1912, by 1930 employed 1,000 foresters, extracting 1,000 tons of coal a day. But it was also pumping out 3 million gallons of water a day out. When coal was nationalised in 1947 in British Coal, NCB took over the deep mine collieries in the forest, but they didn't take over the small scale drift mines worked by free miners. And I remember a particularly amusing story during the miners' strike, when a bunch of Welsh miners decided to come and picket a little drift mine at Simmenjat, and they pulled up there on about 6 coaches for the Welsh miners, only to find it was Sunday and the little drift mine had shut, so there was nobody about. So they went down to the nearest pub and stayed there the rest of the day, I think. So this mine Canop closed in 1960, and one of the major reasons was the cost of pumping water. And the last deep mine in the forest, the Northern United, closed 5 years later on Christmas Day. What a sad Christmas that must have been for the miners. Looking at South Gloucestershire, so for a very brief time, more coal was actually being extracted from South Gloucestershire than in the forest. And the remains of the industry cover a vast area of the county: Bitton, Colpit Heath, Cromwell, Downend, Easton, Frampton, Cotterell, Hannam, Keynsham, Kingswood, Mangotsfield, Oldland, Pucklechurch, Rangeworthy, Siston, Stapleton, Warmley, Westerly and Late, all bandit country as far as I'm concerned. But this map just shows some of the locations. There are very little remains above ground now. You find a few foundations of engine houses, that sort of thing. But there are more than 1,000 mine entry points around. We know there are 42 coal seams, that were worked, and they were a little bit easier to work than the forest ones. And most of them were worked between 1870 and 1920. And this is a picture of the former Frog Lane colliery, comes from South Gloucestershire Council, courtesy of Anne Matson. You see, they did have proper collieries. So looking at iron and ochre extraction, so the largest iron ore deposits in the county and the Francis Dean. It was extracted from limestone outcrops by surface workers known as the scowls in Roman times and probably a bit earlier. These were beds exploited from Roman times, supplied blast furnaces in the forest, Herefordshire and Monmouthshire until the 1600s, when the surface deposits had become commercially exhausted. Looking at ochre, it's a soft pigment deposit finding with crystalline iron ore and limestone. And clear old caves in the Francis Dean is one of the earliest ochre mines of British size, and there's evidence that ochre extraction has taken place since the Neolithic period over 5,000 years ago. And Jonathan Wright, who's pictured there, is the last free miner who still mines the ochre, so it's still a little commercial business. Iron ore was also found in South Gloucestershire, and this rather complex and confusing plan shows the underground workings of Frampton Cotterell iron mine. This is a centre section. There's about another 2 foot either way on this mine, and we think the actual seams are the sort of semi-dotted lines that you can see going from left to right here, essentially. So quarrying, moving on to quarrying. So there are, or were, I should say, quarries all over Gloucestershire extracting rock, gravels, and minerals. Rock and minerals mainly from the sort of forest, rock from the Cotswolds, gravels from the Vale of Gloucester, essentially. And many of these quarries were quite small local concerns used primarily to extract stone for farm buildings. And after they were no longer needed, they were abandoned and left to grass over, essentially. Lovely picture here of some quarry workers in the Minchamhampton quarry. And quarries like this one existed in the Cotswolds, Francis Dean, and South Gloucestershire. Some are still being worked, especially in South Gloucestershire, where if you go down near Yate, there are some massive holes in the ground there, and you don't really notice it because you've got trees on either side. But if you went through the trees, there's like 100-foot drop down to the bottom of the quarries. This is another quarry on Minchamhampton Common. We think it might be Crane Quarry. It looks big and deep, but today it's totally filled in. You wouldn't even know it had been there. But you can see how important this quarry was. There's little tracks there for a little crane that could move along, or wagons. Some extracted blocks. Notice how white they are. When they first extracted, a lot of the Cotswold stone was very white, and it only develops its characteristic sort of brownish, yellowy ochre colour over time. So where you've got limestones, and Gloucestershire is rich in limestones, you have basically the oolite of the Cotswolds and the carboniferous limestones of Forest of Dean in South Gloucestershire. So lime burning, again, was an important industry. To make lime, basically limestone was burnt at high temperatures in lime kilns, and this is a process known as calcination, and it produced quicklime, which is a white, very highly caustic alkaline substance, but that's used in mortar, plaster, lime wash, and also as a soil conditioner. Lime kilns varied in size, but they were typically built into a hillside, so limestone could be easily poured into the top and the quicklime raked out at the bottom. And this comes from the National Stone Centre. It's roughly as a cross section through a typical lime kiln. Um, Picture here is some current mine kilns we have in the county, abandoned ones. So you've got Venture lime kilns at Lidbrook, Hobbs Quarry is the bottom right there, and Leghampton Quarry on the bottom left. And again, there are lots of these around the county. Some are in quite poor states of repair. None of them will ever be used again. Probably the lower Lidbrook ones are among the best, I think. So a quick look at forestry, because it is an industry. Woodland and forests are planted primarily as cash crops, but over a long period. But the cutting and the extraction of timber is an industry, and this is sort of the typical of the plans we have in the archives. This is from Hangar and Conygar Woods in West Kington, which is actually in Wiltshire, but it's owned by the Codrington family of Doddington Park. But many woods were also worked as coppice woodland, which provided regular income as the larger trees, the standards grew. So we have lots of records of these, really interesting. Uh, Felled tree trunks were put onto special trailers called forwarders and taken to sawmills. And from the 1870s onwards, traction engines were very popular for this task, as they could haul large, heavy loads. And this is a lovely picture of a traction engine with 3 forwarders attached. And you only got to look at the size of the timber on that first forwarder to realise what weight that must be. Oh, we went backwards. There we go. Sorry about that. Oh, what happened there? There we go. From there. There we go. There we go. What happened there? Went hiccuped. So traction engines remained prime movers until diesel power began to proliferate. This is a lovely picture of Park End Sawmills lorry. Notice it's only dragging sort of 3 tree trunks, whereas a traction engine could drag a lot more. So because of this industry, there are lots of sawmills around the county, and I love this image. It shows Henry Workman's timber sawmills at Woodchester, sort of circa 1930-31. And there's so much to see in this. It's an amazing photograph. You've got a traction engine dead center, okay, while you can see forwarders either side. In the yard, there's a steam crane, and we know this ran on a set of rails. And the sawmill also had sidings to the right-hand side. I had a shot of this, which connected to the Golden Valley Stride Swindon line. I would imagine here that the actual traction engine has brought these forwarders down, and now they've been transferred to horses, primarily because the horses could get into the yard a lot easier, and they're easier maneuverable than the traction engine was in the confined space. But again, a great photograph. So looking at timber yards, so the Baltic timber trade in Gloucester began in the 1700s, but after the Gloucester Sharpness Canal opened in 1827, this trade exploded. And so large timber yards for sawn deals existed, timber floats for large bulks existed on the canal below the docks. And these existed because most of the timber came in during the summer and autumn when the Baltic ports were free of ice. And they basically have to leave these things floating in water or they would crack out. So they were lifted out by crane. And again, you can see some of the company names bottom left there. Nixon Co. still exist. Price Walker and Stokes still exist. So, massive yards. And to give you an idea of how good this was, this photograph from the British Waterways Archive, which is now the Canal and River Trust, shows some of the vast timber yards on the canal at Gloucester. It's an amazing photograph. So it's taken from Baltic Wharf looking north, which was on that map I've just shown you. It's sort of bottom left, looking north. And that timber float pond, you can see on the sort of top left hand there, you can see timbers in there. And above that, you can just see the entrance to Monk Meadow Dock. But just look at all that timber. Isn't that fascinating and amazing? Just think of all the ships have had to bring that in. Amazing, isn't it? So looking at energy now, okay, so in 1816, just 6 years after the first gas plant had opened in London, the Cheltenham Gas Light and Coke Company had started production of gas. And within a couple of years, they were lighting the whole of the high street by gas. What an achievement. By 1852, they were using about 5,500 tons of coal a year, which produced 29 million cubic feet of gas. And this gas, of course, was coal gas or town gas. It was made by an industrial process that heated coal in the absence of air. And of course, this gave up off the gas, produced coke as a byproduct, which would then be used and burnt in other ways, notably in steelworks. Where they store this gas? Well, they stored it in gasometers. You can see it on the map there above, but also this lovely aerial photograph from Britain from above shows basically the old gasometer in Horton Road, which I'm sure many of us will remember. And by 1860, gas companies existed at Berkeley, Chipping Campden, Cinderford, Dursley, Fairford, Lydney, Newnham, Northleach, Stowe, Stroud, Tetbury, Tewkesbury, Thornbury, Winchcombe, and Wootton Under Edge. So an explosion of gas companies. Most of these, though, were eventually taken into the control and ownership of the local town councils by a process that I don't quite understand, but it would like to do some more research on that. If anybody knows why, do let us know. So old gasworks, though, are easy to spot on OS maps. Just look for the gasometers. So these are gasworks at Gloucester, Tewkesbury, Stroud, Northleach, and Newnham, just to name just a few. And they always coloured black, especially on the first edition Ordnance Survey map. So again, that makes them very, very easy to spot. And you get a feel for how many of them there were. Simply loads of them kicking around. Moving on, electricity. The first place in the county to get electricity was Wickwar, and it was also green electricity, which is staggering, really. So during the winter of 1887 to 1888, Arnold Perrott and Co. Brewery installed a hydroelectric plant to light its brewery at Wickwar, had 100 lamps in the brewery, and it sold the surplus electricity to the town council. Isn't that amazing? The electricity was generated by an overshot 36-foot diameter water wheel, and it drove an Elwell and Parker dynamo, which ran at 550 RPM. So that's quite a lot of water required to turn that overshot wheel and basically to actually drive that dynamo, especially if it's turning at 550. Now, I would imagine there may have been some gearing involved here, but I think it'll have to be. Where was this? Well, we're not 100% sure. The OS map suggests the generator was opposite the brewery, where the lie of the land allowed the Little Avon, which is the sort of the river on the right-hand side, to fill up this large supply pond, which got sluice there. It's number 273 on this map. This is also higher, we think, than the actual brewery, so it allowed this water wheel to get its supply of water to get the kinetic energy. It'd be great to see if there are any more details of this anyway. I've not found any yet, sadly. So subsequently, electricity began in Cheltenham, Gloucester, Tewkesbury, Cirencester, finally Stroud, the last one in 1916. And lots of infrastructure was built for this. And in a typical Victorian way, these things were these places were often things of beauty as well as function. And nothing explains that more than this building here. It's now a small hotel, and it's the substation in Cheltenham. It's down by the museum and the library, basically. And this is where 2,000 volts was transformed down to 100 volts. But look at that sort of architecture. Look at a modern substation doing the same job. Doesn't quite have the same vibe, does it? So electricity generating stations are much harder to find on OS maps if you're looking, because they just tend to be identified as works. This is a more or less typical generation station. This is the Lydney Power Station at Norchard, built in 1923 and owned by the West Gloucestershire Power Company Limited. It was a coal-fired station, like they nearly all were at this time, had an output of 17.5 megawatts and supplied electricity to 300 square miles, covering the Forest, Stroud and Nailsworth. And of course, today this is now the site of the Dean Forest Railway at Norchard. There is still some infrastructure left there. The largest power station in Gloucestershire was Castlemeads on the island in Gloucester. This was opened in 1942 and is one of two war emergency stations which intended to spread the risk due to war damage. The other one was early at Reading. So what they were worried about was if some of the Germans started bombing the power stations, rather like Russia's doing to Ukraine at the moment, you're going to lose power. They needed power. So they built these two war emergency stations, and they were quite large. They used coal as fuel. Each one had an output of 40 megawatt, and it used River 7 water for cooling. So quite an impressive set of cooling there. Um, and coal was brought in by rail on the GWR's dock branch from over, which is the tracks you can just see on the left-hand side. On the photo, though, that bridge with the little, you see it midway up, that's still there. But it was also brought in by barge from the Severn as well. So there is a sort of redundancy in the supply of coal as well. Quick look at glass making. So it began in Gloucestershire in the 1500s and 1600s. Glass houses were formed at Tainton, Woodchester, Newnham, and later at Gloucester Quay. These were mostly set up by Huguenot glassmakers fleeing from religious persecution on the continent. And glass making typically used what they called pot kilns. And these had actually three different furnaces, one holding a crucible to keep the glass molten. One was a glory hole used to reheat the glass during working, as in the picture above. And lastly, there was a layer or a annealer, which was used to slowly cool the glass. You couldn't cool it very quickly, it would crack, so it had to be cooled very gently. And one reason we think the trade coming to this area is about 1615, wood was banned from being used in glass making as it was more important for the navy. So basically, the industry gravitated towards areas with coal. So this is why it came to Gloucestershire. So Gloucester's glass making began in the early 1720s, the large conical glass house on the quay, and also one north of Foreign Bridge. And you can see the one by the quay here is that sort of like the pyramid sort of thing. The site was making bottles, pickling and butter pots and melon glasses in the picture here, but production ended quite early in 1744. Interestingly, in the archive of the Forest of Dean ironmaster David Mushet, there's a letter from James Revett of Old Gravel Lane, not quite what that was, to James Halford in 1811, and it includes comments about and drawing of a frit arch furnace. This is a type of furnace that melts powdery materials into a liquid state and was used to refine glass during the glass making process. I think it actually helped add materials that would colour the glass, but I'm not 100% sure of that. They are different purposes, different ones. But again, lovely bit of drawing there. Quite how it's used is quite hard to figure out, I think. Ironworks and foundries. So Gloucestershire has been associated with ironmaking since the Roman period, possibly earlier than that. And the trade was alluded to in the city's Tudor coat of arms, which has horseshoes and nails on it. And the western half of the county boasted many ironworks and foundries, primarily because of the proximity of its raw materials, iron ore and coal in the forest. We also know that several foundries existed in Gloucester. Kingsholm had at least two, and there are lots of others. This one you've seen here on the 1902 OS map is under what is the Kingsholm Primary School. And of course, prior to the establishment of Wheeler's Nursery, there is one at the Heritage Hub as well. And we're on that. And when we certainly had the work done for Know Your Record, for the record digging, there are lots of iron slag came up, and we've got some examples of it, which we'll try and dig out for the Open Saturday next coming up. One of the main trades in the city was pin making, with pins being made by hand from the 1500s right up until the 1800s. And the process of hand making a pin involves quite a long, complex process. Drawing the wire, annealing the pin, softening it, cutting the wire, attaching the head, sharpening it using a pinner, polishing it, and finally packing. And usually the pins were packed onto sheets of paper. And I'm sure we remember seeing some of those in our mum's darning boxes. I know I do for certain. By 1735, Gloucester was seemingly the largest pin making centre in Britain, and it employed estimated over at sort of 1,200 men, women, and children. Some of the early workers we know were paupers and orphans, employed, essentially free labour, by pin maker John Tilsey via a 1626 agreement with the city corporation. He basically said, "You give me all your poor, and I'll make them work in my factories," and that gives them something to do. Basically, he did pay quite a paltry sum for this, and I don't think they got paid very much. But this is a lovely agreement from the standing orders of the borough council. You can see John Tilsley's name there, roughly in the centre on the second line down, and on the fourth line down in the middle you see pin making. So it's quite scrabbly writing. In 1743, a gentleman called William Coucher set up a fin factory, which is now the Folk Museum, and in 1853 was taken over by the Birmingham firm Kirby, Beard and Co, and became known as Coucher, Kirby, Beard and Tovey because somebody else joined them. A major advance came in the early 1800s when this firm began dabbling with machinery to make pins, firstly just straightening and drawing the wire, then grinding the points. But by the 1820s, there were fully automatic pin making machines that could make 40 to 50 pins per minute. Think about it, almost one a second in 1820. Isn't that amazing? I think you'd be hard pushed to get that sort of speed today. So looking at steel, got to mention the Mushets. So David Mushet, Scotsman, born in 1772. By 1808, he'd moved down and become an established authority on the manufacture in the France of Dean, and he ran the Whitecliffe Ironworks. In 1819, he bought Darkhill near Colford, and though it produced iron for sale, the larger part of it was a coke-fired experimental furnace given over to research, experimental production of iron. When he retired in 1845, he got a large empire, iron and coal mines, and shares in the tramroads that connected them. So a fully rounded businessman here. But interesting, he was an early advocate of animal rights and an opponent of vivisection. But again, despite that, he wasn't a vegetarian, so he still liked his sausage and his bit of steak every now and then. He died at Monmouth's 1847. Is buried at Staunton. Again, it's a very nice grave to go and see. His youngest son, Robert, was born in Colford in 1811, and like his father, he studied metallurgy. 1848, he opened the Forest Steel Works at Darkhill site, and then continued carrying out these experiments in iron and steel making. You thought there'd be nothing left to experiment, but there was. During this time, he refined and perfected the vital Bessemer process of making steel, and you can see a Bessemer converter there at the bottom. But he also invented R. Mushet's Special Steel, RMS. This is the first true tool steel. Tool steels are vitally important because they're harder and be able to cut other steels, and you can still get that steel today. Sadly, though, he's failed to capitalize on either of these famous inventions and soon lost his health and his finances. In 1866, his daughter Mary approached Bessemer, whose own steelmaking processes were not economically viable without Mushet's improvements, and she pleaded her father's case. And Bessemer very graciously decided to pay Mushet an annual pension of £300, about £18,000 today, and he kept that going until his death. He died in Cheltenham in 1891 and is buried in Bouncers Lane Civil Cemetery. And again, it's a nice grave to go and see. Moving on to matches, there are several match factories in the county, but obviously the most famous was Morland's. He was the son of a Stroud Sorer, born in 1828. By 1867, he'd moved to Gloucester and he'd opened the Morland Match Manufactory to make non-safety matches, the English Glory brand. And I'm sure we've all used them and know about them. He became a subsidiary of Bryant and May in 1913, and by 1938 that was wholly owned by Bryant and May, and it remained so until the site closed in 1976. Although obviously the building, the famous sign, is still there. It's now the Morland's Trading Estate. I've got some lovely images from Morland. So these three show from left to right making the match splints. Then you've got mixing the pink stuff, as it was known, which was a mix of phosphorus sequasulfide and potassium chloride with pink dye. That's the mixing process. This is the stuff that ignited. And then you've got drying the matches after their heads have been dipped in the pink stuff. What I want to know is how the hell were all those matches put into those rollers? If it was by hand, that's going to take somebody days. So I believe it must have been some sort of an automated process, but I've not yet found it. Looking at water mills, so you've got the Domesday Book records over 6,000 mills in England, and it's likely there were many more that were not recorded. Most villages had a water mill. This is Ablington Mill in the River Carn. It's a typical village mill, neither big, neither small. Inside their walls, however, mills had lots of complex machinery. This is just the picture inside the old Egypt mills before it was renovated, showing some of the machinery and the cogs there. And again, there are some really interesting stuff on this, the Stroud Water Textile Trust. Larger villages that often had larger mills with complex water management. Bybury Mill, seen here at the top, this had a reservoir in Ablington, 3/4 of a mile away, and it fed the mill via Longleat, which now helps feed the trout farm at Bybury. Lower Slaughter had a huge mill pond just above the wheel, and you can see the wheel there. This was an undershot wheel. There's lots of technicalities on that, and we'll be looking at mills later next year. However, notice the chimneys. Lots of mills later installed steam engines. Several reasons for this, partly as auxiliary power sources to help mills grind corn if water was low. And this year I went to demonstrate that. Low water, lots of mills wouldn't have been able to be used. They could also pump water into a mill pond to keep that mill pond at a level that the mill wheel could turn, and also often to enable the mill to grind corn faster so they could compete with pure steam powered mills. Luckily, we still have lots of mills left around the county. Towns also had mills, could be large. Tewkesbury's Abbey's Mill is a great example, a very large mill. But many rivers had hundreds of mills almost along their length. In the 1880s, for example, the River Chelt had 11 mills from its source at Dowdeswell before it entered the Severn at Wainload. Um, Other rivers had more, and this wasn't really dependent on their size. The relatively small River Isborne, which ran from Cleeville to the Warwickshire Avon, Evesham, had 22 mills along its length. Amazing. And most importantly, it's got Stanway Mill, which is now a fully restored working mill. And I say, if you haven't been to Stanway Mill, please look it up on the Stanway Estates website and go, because it's a fascinating place. And when the mill starts grinding, that whole building comes alive with a sort of grinding and a wobbling. It's wonderful. It's so great. I love it there. So textile mills, originally water powered to drive cloth making machinery. This is Ebley Mill next to the Stroud Water Canal, 1910. There'd been a coal mill on this site since the 1300s, but after 1800 it was bought by the Clissold family and rebuilt purely as a textile mill. Today it survives in part as the headquarters of Stroud District Council. How much longer, we don't know. Cloth mills made cloth and related products, so these views show carpet looms inside the mills of Champion and Hall carpet manufacturers of Dursley. And again, you look at the machinery, you can imagine the noise going on there. The woolen trade was obviously once the principal industry in the Stroud area, initially simply because of the availability of water power to drive mill machinery, though steam power obviously took over. And Gloucestershire itself was famous for its superfine broadcloth, but most of this was intended for the overseas market and not local consumption. Champion and Hall, we know they originally a saddlery business, but then they expanded into rope making before moving to cloth and carpet. So quite an evolution for one company. And it'd be interesting to find out a bit more about their history, I think. Different types of mills. So fulling mills and gig mills. So a fulling was the process of cleaning and thickening cloth or wool to make it stronger. This was done by literally pounding it with heavy hammers, known as fulling stocks. And this is the Stroud Water Textile Trust Dunkirk Mill, which does open. I recommend you go and visit it if you're interested in industrial history. So you see these massive hammers, which would turn by water and then by steam, literally to beat the wool in. And it's an incredible process. A gig mill or a gigging machine was a type of raising machine that used racks of teasels to raise and produce a nap on the cloth. And this is one again in Dunkirk Mill, so again it makes it another reason to go and visit this place. And these gigging mills used fuller's teasels, Dipsacus phelonium setavus, which had stouter recurved spines on the seed heads, not like the common teasels, which is Dipsacus sylvestris. And if you see the difference, there is a marked difference. The fuller's teasels were much stronger and much stouter and also much sharper, and they worked really, really well. So most fulling gig mills, as I've said, were powered by water, but steam power very quickly superseded this, made it more efficient. Another bunch of mills, flock and shoddy mills. So certainly these mills are more or less indistinguishable from corn mills, but their internal machinery differed. So whereas corn mills used millstones to grind corn, flock mills used a large drum whose spindle had fitted with iron spikes, and you'd feed the fibres into this, and a fan would break these all up, blow away dust and impurities, and then leave you with sort of proper sort of fibres you could then use. These mills produced flock, okay, which was then used up as woolen material. Usually it was collected by rag and bone men used to come round. Shoddy mills, very similar, but they used a mix of recycled wool and new wool. And oddly, it produced a cheaper end product, which I'm not quite sure about if it was using new wool. But basically, flock and shoddy used for stuffing mattresses and upholstery. So again, in great demand because everybody needed their materials. Paper mills again, so these used water power to beat flax, cotton, and rag waste to a pulp, which could then be used to make paper. Initially, this pulp was processed by hand, but from the early 1800s, most mills utilized the new Fourdrinier process. This used paper-making machines, which allowed the continuous production of paper rolls at that early date, and it made handmade paper making obsolete virtually overnight. Paper mills are usually much larger than other mills to accommodate all the processes involved. And this is the Postlit paper mill near Winchcombe. And you can see the sort of size of it, way bigger than a normal mill. And we know there are at least 15 paper mills in Gloucestershire over the period that we're looking at, probably few more. Brief look at windmills, often seen as poor cousins to water mills. So they were found where water gradients were too low to drive a water wheel fast enough to ground corn. And they were common in the Vale of Gloucester and the Vale of Evesham. This is a lovely carving of a post mill windmill in the porch of St Peter's Church in Lakehampton. And there's about 2 or 3 of these windmills carved in. So presumably they must have been around that area. I don't know where yet. I'd like to find out. The one next to it was an industrial water supply pump in the yard of Price Walker and Co in Gloucester, and we think this was used to take water either from a borehole or possibly the canal to pump it up to give a header tank for firefighting just in case. But again, interestingly used a windmill to do that, presumably so it would continuously keep topped up, I guess. Windmills were also common on the high Cotswolds, where wind power was used to pump water up from boreholes, usually to isolated farmsteads and for animals. Some of these were made locally. This is the lovely Hercules oil bath windmill made by Godwin's and Sons of Quennington. Today, you'll notice similar ones used for electricity generation, and these pumps cropped up all over the place, has to be said. There used to be a lovely one by Hartley Farm on the top of Lakehampton, but sadly that's now gone. So looking at some engineers now. So Savoury Sons, brothers William and James, opened the High Orchard Ironworks. 4 years later, the partnership dissolved quite quickly, with each one starting their own independent concern. So it was really strange. But William and Savoury Sons became an engineering millwright firm, famous for being iron and brass makers and also boiler makers. So lots of these firms did lots of different things, unlike you find today. They partly specialised in iron mill wheels, but by 1857 they were making portable steam engines, steam printing presses, and all manner of other things. There's an incredible list. In 1881, the firm was purchased by T&W Summers, who continued the business. And this is a lovely picture of a Savoury and Son water wheel at Postslip. It probably originally connected to the paper mills, we suspect, or maybe there's a coal mill lower down. But where it is now is in no relation to where it was operating. This house just had it on its property, and they incorporated it into the main wall. So looking at Summers and Scott, so basically, after they purchased William Savoury Sons, they continued working, and they earned quite a good reputation for very high class workmanship and careful design. They were making machinery for making linoleum. 1889, again, not very long, the partnership dissolved and the firm became known as Summers and Scott. They made lots of multiple drilling machines, but by the 1890s, it switched to building stern wheel boats for river use. What a change in direction that was. And with the firm continued in business till at least 1910, possibly longer. Famous Field and Platt now, founded in 1866 by Samuel Fielding and James Platt. Initially, the company made small engineering machines and components, but it branched out into larger items, gas and oil engines, iron steamships. One, the SS Sabrina, is still in use on the Thames. They made bridges as well across the Severn, which was only replaced in 1962. 1871, they began making the portable hydraulic riveting technology of Ralph Tweddle and quickly built up a massive business exporting hydraulic machinery in addition to engines worldwide. The firm was particularly noted for its quality and the long life of their products, and also for the care of their staff, which is something you don't see as much anymore. And they remained in business until 2000. One of Fielding's engines, thankfully, can be seen in working at the Waterways Museum in Gloucester. And again, it's a beautiful machine. And if you do get the chance to go and see it running, do it, and please do make a contribution to its survival, because they need all the money they can get, and it would be criminal if this machine went. Get my teeth in. Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, formed in 1860, began making goods wagons, passenger coaches, then diesel electrical units, electrical multiple units, various other horse-drawn wagons, and other special purpose vehicles. It supplied the original red trains for Toronto subway and also rolling stock for London Underground. World War One, they made horse and railway ambulances, artillery limbers, aircraft wings, and in World War Two, they were one of the two places that made whole Churchill tanks. But they also, importantly, made pivoting sections for the Mulberry harbours used in D-Day and beyond. Post-war, sadly, the company's shroud manufacturing ceased in 1994. But this is just a look at some of the things that they were making, isn't it wonderful? And luckily, they made great photographs of these high quality photographs. We've got 119 albums of photographs of the thing they made, so amazing. Sissons & Co. Established in 1889 when William Sissons took over the small marine works of J.J. Seekings & Co. in Key Street Ironworks, Gloucester. So another ironworks in Gloucester. Specialised in the design and development of high-speed launch marine engines and boilers, but also designed vessels of all types used on Thames Severn and Lake Windermere. He had a strong interest in technical education. The firm became known for designing engineering equipment for educational purposes. So somebody was thinking ahead. In 1958, Bellis and Morecambe, who had a link with Seekings, acquired full control of the company, and the Sissons name disappeared, sadly. Again, examples of these engines can be seen in the Waterways Museum, so please go and visit it. Listers, so Lister and Company, founded in 1867 by Robert Ashton, primarily to produce agricultural machinery. By the 1900s, it was making Mikhail Pedersen's famous cream separator, sheep shear machinery, milk churns, wooden barrels for butter, and from the offcuts of the wooden barrels, making wood-based garden furniture. So what a portfolio. 1909, it began making petrol engines, and in 1929 made its first diesel engine. All of these were painted in that iconic shade of Brunswick green that we all know and recognise. World War One and World War Two, it focused on war production, obviously making engines, lighting sets, agricultural implements, and shell cases. So in 1965, Listers were acquired by Hawker Siddeley, who also owned its old rival Petter. And in 1986, they merged both to form Lister Petter Limited. At its height, this company had over 5,000 people, noted for its regular company excursions and also medical care for its staff. It survives in reduced form today, but its engines exist around the world and they're favourite items for restoration by small engine enthusiasts. I'm really pleased to say that the Mid-Gloss Engine Preservation Society will be coming along to our next Saturday event, bringing a couple of stationary engines. Can't wait, they are so good. Muir Hill and Wingett. So it began in the 1920s. Muir Hill was an engineering firm based in Manchester. They specialised in products to expand the use of Fordsome tractors, primarily bucket loaders. But in the 1930s, they invented dumper truck, as can be seen here. 1959, they were taken over by the Wingett Group, and production moved to the former wagon works in Gloucester under the name Boydell Limited, but still trading as Muir Hill. Corporation Games then ensured they had many different owners over the years, including Babcock and Wilcox, Sanderson, and many others. Today, they survive as Lloyd Loaders MH Limited, so you can still get their equipment. A.W. Hawksey Limited of Hucklecote. A.W. Hawksey is a really complicated contraction of Armstrong, Whitworth, Hawker Siddeley. Formed in 1940 by Hawker Siddeley, who were the owners of GAC at the time, just to make Armstrong, Whitworth, Albemarle bombers, you can see on the right there. Not a bad aircraft, but by the time it reached front line, it was outclassed, so basically production changed. So they were to be built at the Bentham GAC factory, which is now long gone, but most were made elsewhere. So this site was primarily used as an experimental design office and factory, and a lot of work on the Gloucester E2839 Whittlejet basically, and also the Meteor was undertaken on this site. Post-war, though, it switched to supplying prefab bungalows to the Ministry of Works, making upwards of 5,000 a year before production switched to air engines for the Korean War, then back to prefabs. And we've got a whole archive of A.W. Hawksey with some fascinating drawings of these and how they were made. Manufacturing ceased in 1959 and the site was sold to British Nylon Spinners, aka ICI. Motor Viking, so we had two main motorcycle manufacturers, Cotton and Bourne. The Cotton Motor Company was founded by Frank Cotton, ran until 1953. It traded until 1980, but a business making replicas was set up and still available today. Bourne Motors was a cycle car and motorcycles manufacturer founded in Harrow but moved to Stroud. They finished in 1936, but actually continued in general aviation, and plastics, and didn't close until 2023. That's a good typo, isn't it? Quick look at plastics. 1908, Cassine plastic, made from milk curd, was invented by a Latvian chemist, Victor Schutz. Styrite Limited obtained a production license, and in 1911 moved from Middlesex to Lightpill in Stroud, as this was nearer to its Irish milk supply. Marketed as Aeronoid, this Cassine plastic could be dyed in bright colours, withstand washing, ironing, dry cleaning, and became very, very popular for buttons and other household goods. Although mostly superseded by oil-based plastics, it's still made today on a small scale for high-quality goods, so Stroud factory closed in 82. Quick look at shipbuilding, because we are seeing we're running out of time. Lots of ships a bit around the county, especially on shipyards on the riverbanks, such as Framalode. In Gloucester, many ships were built by the Hipwood family, owned a yard above Westgate Bridge and ran a yard on Alney Island. The last ship they built was in 1866, the steamer Belle Marie, and there's a whole history on the Belle Marie, which we haven't got time for. And we know the Pixgill and Miller Company also built boats there as well. More famously, Edwin Clark. He set a business in 1884 at Hope Mill opposite on the Canal Ironworks, started making boats there, went on to specialised in prefabricated craft, making steamboats. This is the Thames River steamer Henley, still working today. They also began to make surface condensing engines, compound engines, became very famous. But by 1896, sadly, Edwin Clark died. Within 3 years, the company was on the verge of closure. This is a lovely photo from the Heritage Steamboat Trust showing one of their products outside their boatyard. Fast, beautiful picture. However, in 1900, Isaac J. Abdallah, a shipping broker of Manchester, took over the boatyard and what was left of the business of Clark. And then, oddly, he had a merger with Mitchell & Co., who are cloth merchants in Manchester. And this strange partnership went on to make over 100 vessels, mostly small steamers and launches for overseas use. There's a couple of their products here. Moving on to tinplate. Redbrook was very famous, tinplate in the forest. Redbrook Tagger was a very famous, thinnest tinplate in the world at the time. Sadly, the works closed in 61 after being able to compete with automated tinplating techniques in South Wales. And the site is now largely demolished, and the area Tinman's Green has been redeveloped for housing. But there are some very interesting documents left in this, and also at the Dean Heritage Centre. Allied trade Tabasco is thatching, more common in the Vale. Again, we all seen it. It is an industry, I think. Interesting on this picture. This is a Oxtall's farm in Frampton Mansell, and it's interesting because it shows that this thatcher, rather than taking all the thatch off in one go, as you can see at the Frampton one above, this thatcher liked to do it as he worked along. So as he took it off, he put it on. I'm not sure many thatchers do that nowadays. Walking sticks and brothers, so in the Stroud areas, a thriving little industry sprang up making walking sticks. Chalford Stick Company here with the employees there, lovely photo. But the bigger Bliss Mills of AC Harrison and Co down there, and again by the canal. We don't have too many records of these, sadly. It'd be nice to find some more. I saw a mouse wear there on the stair. You're all humming that now. Some industries went on with little or no record, and this is a fantastic image showing a really unlikely trade. It's two Cheshire clog makers on the Colesbourne estate making clog soles for sale in Oldham, Lancashire, but they made them in Gloucestershire. Note the stacks of clog soles in the background, and they lived on the estate, possibly in the tents, we're not quite sure. Clogs were generally made of soft, lightwood woods, the alder. These are alder, and unlike Dutch clogs, so as you see there on the top right picture, British clogs just had wooden soles and leather uppers, which gave better comfort and a tighter fit for labourers. So these guys were making these soles. Now, and on that note, finally we sort of come to the end. So our next event at the Heritage Hub is called Gone But Not Forgotten, the focus on Gloucestershire industrial heritage. Talks by Mike Fenton on the railways of Stroud and Stephen Limbrick on the Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company's carriage shed, which is a lovely building. But as well as the stationary engines, we've got lots of local industrial organisations coming up. View documents on view. The Family History Society will be on hand as well, and you see them there. I'll just go a quick plug. Our secrets revealed and Saturday events are going to take a break for Christmas. just time off for good behaviour, you can call it. So just in time for Valentine's Day, our next Secrets Revealed talk will be Tart, Trants and Toms, the talk of negotiable affection, which will be all about prostitution and the like in Gloucestershire. So it will be quite fun. And our next Saturday event, a little bit more mild, Love, Laughter and Ever After on 7th of February. And on that note, Gemma, I'll hand back to you, okay?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely fascinating as always. I think we'll probably leave it there. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you, as always, to the lovely John. Thank you to all of you for coming along today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one and wish you a very happy Christmas.